On November 2nd, 2022, classified documents from Biden's time as vice president were found in the Penn Biden Center, a think tank and office that Biden used after ending his tenure as vice president. The documents were discovered by his personal attorneys in a locked closet while packing files away as they prepared to shut the office down. Immediately upon discovering the documents, the White House counsel's office notified the National Archives, who took possession of them the next morning. Fast forward to December 20th, 2022. While cooperating with the FBI and National Archives, Biden's personal lawyers again discovered more classified documents at his home in Wilmington, Delaware. This was right on the heels of the FBI's raid of Mar-a-Lago, where hundreds of classified documents were found. From a purely political perspective, this was not good optics for Biden. After spending the better part of 5 months criticizing Trump for his mishandling of classified materials, here we had a trickle of documents found in numerous places that Biden used. It had to stop. With his full cooperation and without the need of a search warrant, the FBI searched Biden's properties at his home in Rehoboth Beach and Wilmington, Delaware, turning up additional classified documents. Altogether, about 20 documents, consisting of about 100 pages, were found, along with personal notes that contained classified information. Soon after their discovery, Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed a special counsel to investigate whether Biden had willfully retained those documents. As Garland has repeatedly stated, the DOJ under his leadership carries out investigations without fear or favor. In order to seem impartial and untainted by loyalty to the president that appointed him, attorneys general often appoint special counsels who are members of the opposing party in some capacity. In other words, I can't be biased. I appointed my enemy to investigate me. To this end, Garland appointed Robert Hur to the role in late January of 2023. Hur had previously been the U.S. attorney in Maryland under the Trump administration. The special counsel spent 15 months investigating Biden's possessions of the classified documents. But this creates another risk: partisanship from the other side. Welcome to another episode of Cypher Report, where we go beyond the headlines, where facts live and clickbait dies, in order to give you the tools, information, and analysis you need to decrypt the world. In today's episode, we are doing a deep dive into Robert Hur's report on Biden's handling of classified information. For the purposes of this segment, we're not going into the details of the relatively few lines of the report that are unrelated to the facts of the matter. Hur is not a doctor or a neurologist. His comments regarding Biden's mental and cognitive status, which the media latched onto, are not germane to the matter at hand, whether Joe Biden willfully retained classified documents. We will cover that in part 2 of this segment, which focuses on the media's response. But before we get into this report, hit that like button for the algorithms. It really does help us out. We'll begin by examining the distinctions between the cases involving Trump and Biden, as their respective actions determine the differing outcomes. We'll then move on to the classified documents themselves and why Hur declined to charge President Biden. Remember, the legal threshold to obtain a conviction for both cases hinges on the prosecution's ability to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that documents were willfully retained, a very high bar that may need to be changed. Let's go ahead and get into it. Now, numerous supposed conservative commentators immediately jumped onto the notion that there exists a two-tier system of justice and a double standard because Hur refused to charge Biden with improper handling of classified documents.
I do not give a shit about that at all. My entire contention is that this is a clear double standard, and this is an argument that I see people on the left make to appear magnanimous all the time, right? Which is what they'll say. They'll say, "Oh, maybe charge both of them," or "Yeah, technically, what both did were wrong."
I don't think both should be charged.
Is that Joe Biden gets off, Donald Trump gets the book thrown at him, and it's very plain for the American people to see this. You've got basically two ex-officials with classified documents. One gets the book thrown at him, one gets off scot-free, and it's not a hard case to make for the American people to see how differently these two men are being treated.
Stuffed classified documents down their pants and been excused. Hillary Clinton, who is subpoenaed on information that would literally be prosecuted for any person in the military, destroyed evidence, went against the subpoena power. We're talking about Biden and something he openly admitted on TV that he did that was absolutely impeachable and absolutely unethical and against everything that you do in office. And yet they want to go after Trump for something that really was benign, that has nothing to do with anything that he's being prosecuted for, other than having some documents, not stuff that could actually be used against him legally for something he broke the law on. This is an unbelievable double standard of justice, and it shouldn't be excused.
while innocent and good Trump, who did nothing wrong, was actually charged. We know that this is nonsense, and so does Special Counsel Robert Hur. In Chapter 13 of the report, Hur meticulously details the key differences between the Biden and Trump cases. The report first notes that presidents and vice presidents are, quote, exempt from the ordinary rules governing classified information that apply to almost everyone else, end quote, and that the federal government has foregone charging, quote, many former presidents and vice presidents who knowingly retained information concerning national security. With one exception, though, Donald Trump. Here, Hur notes the following, quote, it is not our role to assess the criminal charges pending against Mr. Trump, but several material distinctions between Mr. Trump's case and Mr. Biden's are clear. Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden, the allegations set forth in the indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would clearly establish not only Mr. Trump's willfulness, but also serious aggravating facts. Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents to avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite. According to the indictment, not only did he refuse to return documents for months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it. In contrast, Mr. Biden alerted authorities, turned in classified documents to the National Archives and the Department of Justice, and in 2022 and 2023, consented to the search of multiple locations, including his homes. Mr. Biden permitted the seizure and review of handwritten notes he believed to be his personal property, and in numerous other ways cooperated with the investigation. This is a major distinction. The Department of Justice attempted to work with Trump 4 months before launching a formal effort to retrieve the documents via a warrant. The differences between Trump and Biden here couldn't be any more night and day. But what about others who have been charged in the past? Why are there different rules for vice presidents versus underlings? What about Petraeus? Well, I'm glad you asked. First of all, there are just material differences between the nature of the role of the elected officials and members of the DoD. This may be a distinction that shouldn't exist, but it does exist due to the nature of the jobs themselves. The president and vice president need to have near unfettered access to classified materials, as well as being originating authorities, otherwise known as they create classified materials and information themselves. Furthermore, as Hur points out, quote, Petraeus lied when questioned by the FBI agents, telling them that he had not provided classified information to his biographer. Mr. Biden's case began with a proactive self-disclosure, and he has cooperated with the Department of Justice and Special Counsel by consenting to multiple searches of his personal residence and offices. Third, there was strong evidence of willfulness in Petraeus' case, in light of his lies and obfuscation, where Mr. Biden has asserted his rightful ownership of his notebooks based on a long history of former presidents and vice presidents retaining diaries, notes, and other writings that contain classified information. Despite these important differences, Petraeus was charged only with a misdemeanor, end quote. In other words, Biden worked with the Department of Justice. They cannot prove that he lied about anything he talked about, and the notebooks themselves that Biden quoted from were considered to be rightfully his personal property based on precedent. Admittedly, though, the notebooks are a little bit of a gray area, one that I personally believe that Congress should clarify. In Chapter 10 of the report, Hur notes that the Presidential Records Act of 1978 established the practice of separating personal matters from presidential records. It defines presidential records as documents created or received by the president on or his staff to assist and advise him in the carrying out of his official duties. Additionally, as Hur notes, personal records are essentially any material that are of purely private or non-public character and do not relate to the office of the president. These include diaries, journals, or other personal notes serving as the functional equivalent of a diary or journal, which are not prepared or utilized or circulated or communicated in the course of transacting government business. One would think here then that this would mean that some of the personal notebooks that Biden retained would fall into at least a mixed category and should therefore have been turned over to the National Archives. However, and this is important, shortly after the passage of the Presidential Records Act, Ronald Reagan's diaries set the precedent that even highly classified notes could be considered to be personal effects, not subject to the Presidential Records Act. Now, this section goes on for approximately 8 pages, explaining the Iran-Contra case and how the Reagan diaries fit into it. But it is sufficient to point out, as Hur states, that, quote, President Reagan left office with his presidential diaries, which contained classified information, and stored those diaries in his private home. The Department of Justice, the National Archives, and others knew that President Reagan treated his diaries, containing classified information, as personal property. But no agency took action to recover the classified materials or to investigate or prosecute the former president. Continuing on, he states, quote, Indeed, some diary entries specifically describe information recorded there as very hush-hush or top secret. Some entries were obviously classified at the time he wrote them. Some continue to be classified until at least 2007. And some contain national security information that appears to be sensitive to this day. End quote. Conservatives often talk about the intent of a law, or what the authors of a law intended it to mean. What better contemporary example exists than those that wrote the law and those who were tasked with enforcing it shortly after its passage, both agreeing that a president's diaries are to be considered personal property. If you have a better way to understand the intent of a law than just asking those who wrote it, I'm all ears. Now, the facts laid out here establish that there is no double standard between Trump's prosecution and Biden's lack of prosecution. If anything, this further reinforces the notion that had Trump simply cooperated with the National Archives request, he probably would have been in the clear. It speaks to how Trump's temperament and ego are his undoing. He is constitutionally incapable of understanding that the law applies to him. He seems to think that being a president is supposed to make you immune from being held accountable. This is a recurring theme in his second run for presidency. So people that cry foul about a double standard are only right insofar as the laws and precedents that dictate how the top echelons of American power are given leeway and the benefit of doubt that a lower ranked person may not receive. As a former holder of a security clearance, I can say with confidence that as you get more access to more information, more responsibility, and are allowed to take documents outside of a controlled environment, innocent mistakes are not prosecuted. The reason that the law focuses on willful mishandling of classified material is due to the volume and the necessity of not wanting to punish innocent mistakes. As long as said materials do not make it to adversaries, the level of punishment is minor. Even in the case of Petraeus, he was only charged with a misdemeanor. So now this brings us to the central question. Did Biden willfully retain classified documents? The bulk of Hur's 345-page report focuses on the material facts of the case and offers explanations both for and against charges. Let's begin with a brief overview of the facts. Broadly speaking, the classified documents can be put into 4 broad categories. Personal notebooks from his time as vice president, documents relating to his long Senate career that found in his home, documents found at the Penn Biden Center and the University of Delaware, and documents relevant to the Afghanistan troop surge during Obama's first term. As we've already discussed and analyzed the notebooks in detail, we'll focus on the remaining 3, starting with the Senate batch. An organized box of documents was found in his Delaware home. The documents detailed official travels to the Soviet Union, West Germany, and Yugoslavia. The box also contained a dozen documents that are currently classified. As Hur points out, information about these trips was included in Biden's 2007 book, Promises to Keep, but the classified information therein was not. Promises to Keep was a memoir designed to show his foreign policy chops in his run for president in 2008. We know why these trips were used in the book because of recordings we have between Biden and his ghostwriter, Zwanitzer. An important detail to note here is that while the documents are currently classified at the secret level, the classified markings on the documents themselves were labeled confidential or confidential no foreign. Confidential is the lowest level of classification and is considered to be the least damaging if leaked. The no foreign label means that they are not to be shared with foreign governments, but are still not considered to be very dangerous. This means that sometime after Biden came into possession of those documents, they had their classifications increased. Of the dozen files found in this box, only 1 was labeled secret. This is important to point out. First, confidential isn't always a classified marking. In Congress, the label is often affixed to documents that are to be held in confidence. Perhaps Congress or the executive should change the label to avoid confusion. As Hur points out, quote, "In addition, Mr. Biden told us in his interview that he does not recognize the marking confidential as a classified marking. To him, the marking means that a document should be held in confidence, but not necessarily that it is classified. Although confidential is in fact a category of classified information enumerated in the governing executive order, we would likely be unable to refute Mr. Biden's claim that he did not know this." And so, due to the age of the documents and the muddy nature of what confidential means, Hur refused to bring charges for these documents, as he felt that he could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Biden willfully retained classified information. Let's move now to the documents found in the Penn Biden Center at the University of Pennsylvania and the documents found in the University of Delaware. The documents found at the Penn Biden Center were a hodgepodge of personal documents, notes, and classified documents that were delivered to the center by Biden's staff. Biden's staff was in charge of moving the documents and separating personal records from presidential records. Hur notes that the documents made a total of 3 trips in a short span of time. The staff packed up the vice president's office in the course of a couple of days and moved them to the transition wing. From the transition wing, they moved to the temporary location of the Penn Biden Center in DC, and then finally moved from the temporary location to the permanent location. During this time, the staff did not believe that the office contained classified documents. They quickly packed 15 boxes to be moved, and then didn't go through each box, even after they made it to the Penn Biden Center, as, quote, "there was no need." The documents found at the University of Delaware also followed a similar process. First, the documents were collected over his long career in the Senate, and the vast majority of them predate the Senate's rules for tracking and handling classified information. Additionally, these documents were shipped by his Senate staff to the National Archives as a courtesy before being donated to the university. The staff was responsible for separating documents into what could be kept and what had to be returned to the government. Finally, the secret documents were found during a review by an archivist and other staff members of the university after the discovery of documents at the Penn Biden Center. It is important to note that during his tenure in the Senate, Biden had collected over 2,000 boxes and 415 gigabytes worth of documents, the vast majority of which are personal records. And so, due to the confluence of factors, Hur ultimately declined to charge Biden with willful retention of classified documents. I think we're beginning to see a pattern here. This finally brings us to what Hur has described as the strongest case against Biden: the classified documents dealing with Afghanistan. The Afghanistan documents were found in a single box, commingled with Biden's personal effects. The classified documents were contained in 2 hand-labeled folders, Facts First and Afghanistan. Biden identified that he hand-labeled both files. Both folders contained classified materials that Biden used to write his 2009 Thanksgiving memo arguing against the 2009 Afghanistan troop surge. The classified documents include official PowerPoint briefings, official military and State Department assessments, and alternatives to a troop surge, among other things. For example, one of the documents found in the box was a report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, addressing topics related to the U.S. war in Afghanistan. The document was labeled Top Secret /HCS-P/SI/ORCON/no foreign. The meaning of this label is that the report contained raw human-driven intelligence and signals intelligence. Signals intelligence being communication over digital RF waves, cell phones, etc. Furthermore, it had to be controlled by the creator to ensure that it would not be widely distributed. Essentially, this document contained highly sensitive information that would damage U.S. interest if it was leaked or found its way into enemy hands. The fact that these documents were used in Biden's official capacity as vice president meant that they should have been turned over to the National Archives even if they were not classified. The classification simply makes it worse. As I noted earlier, I had a clearance while in the military. These sorts of documents are important to tightly control as they can contain not just intelligence, but the sources and methods used to gather said intelligence. The human-driven and signals-based intelligence report could be one such report, as it is in a raw format. But the question becomes, did Biden willfully retain classified documents? In my estimation, based on the arguments made in the Special Council Report, I believe that he willfully retained at least some of them. But proving that he knew that they were still classified or knew all the contents is a different story. Let's now move to the arguments made by Hur on the willful retention part. The first factor that indicates that Biden knew of the classified material is a recorded conversation he had with his ghostwriter, Zwanitzer. In this conversation, Biden talked about his son Beau and read from one of his diaries about a conversation he had with Obama about Iraq. Here, he was reminded of how he had a similar conversation about Afghanistan and stated, quote, "So this was early on in 2009. I just found all the classified stuff downstairs. I wrote the president a handwritten 40-page memo arguing against deploying additional troops to to Afghanistan, on the grounds that it wouldn't matter, that the day that we left would be like the day before we arrived. And I made the same argument. I wrote that piece 11 or 12 years ago." Now, this line by itself may not mean much. He could have been exclusively referring to the handwritten memorandum of his notes. Biden is also known to loosely talk about, everything, and that could explain using classified documents incorrectly. This explanation is plausible. However, there is other factors at play here. As we mentioned previously, commingled in the box containing the classified Afghanistan documents were various personal documents. These documents included the final book proposal for Promise Me Dad, dated February 16th, 2017, which was around the same time he had told Zwanitzer that he had just found the classified documents. Additionally, other personal documents were placed in the box later. For example, on March 5th of 2017, Biden wrote in one of his notebooks that he wanted to get a copy of an offer from the Washington Speakers Bureau. A copy of that contract with Biden's handwriting was found in the same box. Numerous other documents of sentimental value were found in the box, some of which extended years beyond his conversation with Zwanitzer. The key motivating factor that Hur lays out for the willful retention is, in fact, that they were of sentimental value to Biden, that they can be used to prove that he was right about Afghanistan. A key moment during Biden's interview is actually illustrative to this point. Quote, "Biden initially said that he was not aware that he had kept the Thanksgiving memo after his vice presidency. In response to a follow-up question, he said, 'I guess I wanted to hang on to it for prosperity's sake. This was my position on Afghanistan.' And it later became discussed. It became discussed inside the foreign policy establishment that I was recommending it." At the very least, this speaks to the handwritten 40-page memo. But proving that he willfully retained the other documents is a bit murkier. While the box was repeatedly used for years to store things that Biden wanted to keep, other than the line that he, quote, "just found all the classified stuff," there's no indication that he knew there was other classified material contained in that box. We can suppose that he went through the box in detail after finding the memo, but we cannot know for sure. The memo that Biden wrote would also have been considered classified, or at least classified at the time of writing it, and that could have been what he was referring to. Furthermore, Hur states, quote, "A reasonable juror could also conclude that even if Mr. Biden found classified documents about Afghanistan in his Virginia home in February of 2017, and even if he remembered he had them after that day, and even if they were the same documents found in his garage 6 years later and 100 miles away in Delaware, there is a shortage of evidence that he found both the Afghanistan folder and the Facts First folder. This is important because even though the Afghanistan folder contained documents that were marked classified in 2009, there are still serious questions about whether those particular documents remain sensitive today or when Mr. Biden met with Zwanitzer in 2017. Thus, the Afghanistan folder alone is not a strong basis upon which to prosecute Mr. Biden for willful retaining national defense information. And if Mr. Biden saw only the Afghanistan folder and not the Facts First folder, which did contain national defense information, he did not willfully retain such national defense information. Indeed, a reasonable person could come to that conclusion. Finally, the last important mitigating factor we would like to bring up here is similar to the one we started with, Biden's cooperation. Hur stated, quote, "As Biden said in his interview with our office, if he had found marked classified documents after the vice presidency, quote, I would have gotten rid of them. I would have given them back to their source. I had no purpose for them, and I think it would be inappropriate for me to keep clearly classified documents." Some reasonable jurors may credit this statement and conclude that if Mr. Biden found the classified documents in the Virginia home, he forgot about them rather than willfully retaining them. It is for all these reasons that we discussed that, quote, the evidence falls short of proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Biden retained and disclosed these classified materials willfully. The department's prior treatment of former presidents and vice presidents who kept national security materials also counsels against prosecution of Mr. Biden, as do the most relevant aggravating and mitigating facts presented here. Perhaps the DOJ policy and the law should change. While I fully understand the need for mercy and justice, especially when it comes to innocent mistakes, there comes a point where negligence is too big to ignore. Over the last 40 years, numerous high-ranking officials have been caught with classified documents in their possession, and in at least a few of these cases, those involved should have known better. Biden is one of those people. But that isn't how the law currently operates. The only reason that Trump was charged is because he was the only one who refused to cooperate with the DOJ in any meaningful capacity, and instead sought to destroy evidence of his refusal. He clearly, beyond a reasonable doubt, obstructed justice and willfully retained these documents. Biden did not. But that concludes this episode of the Cypher Report. Be sure to join us for part 2, where we will examine the media's narrative surrounding its release and why we think the media focused on the wrong thing. We'll be sure to give you the tools, information, and analysis you need to decrypt the world. Join us.